Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, which is part of our ongoing COVID response webinar series. My name is Meredith Medlin, and I am glad to have you with us today. During this hectic time for all of us, but especially for small businesses, Accion is proud to support entrepreneurs through access to capital and through educational opportunities like this webinar. And we're really grateful to our partners at Fifth Third Bank for their commitment to small business as well. Today's webinar will help you think through changes and adjustments that you should be making to your business plan as we all look to recover from the COVID crisis. If you had a business plan before this pandemic began, now is probably a good time to take a look at that plan and identify areas where you should adapt to our new reality. We'll walk through some of those areas of a business plan that might need some adaptation today, as well as addressing a couple questions for entrepreneurs who are starting fresh with their brand new plan. We've got two fantastic speakers with us to help you think through this business planning today, but before we begin, I just want to quickly go over a few housekeeping items. First, you should be able to view our presentation through the Zoom Webinar Tools window on your desktop if you've joined us by computer. Next, you will see a chat function in the black toolbar on the Zoom window. Please click on that chat button and type in any questions you may have throughout the presentation. I'll administer a question and answer session following our discussion based on what is typed into that chat window. So please type those questions there. We are recording today's webinar, so you can refer back to this information at a later time. I will send an email containing a link to that recording shortly after this webinar concludes. In addition, that follow-up email will contain a very short 2-minute survey that gives you a chance to tell us what you think of today's webinar. So please do take a couple minutes to give us feedback after the presentation. And now I am very pleased to introduce my colleague Philip Henry from Fifth Third Bank, who will share a bit about the bank's commitment to the community before we dive into our discussion. So thanks so much for being with us today, Philip.
Thank you, Meredith. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Philip Henry. I'm a Community and Economic Development Program Officer for Fifth Third Bank. And once again, thank you for joining today's webinar, Revising Your Business Plan for Recovery. This is our first business webinar of 2020 in partnership with Accion. Our commitment to put business customers at the center of everything we do is a driving force behind our ongoing collaboration and partnership with Accion. Together, we share a common goal, and that's helping entrepreneurs overcome barriers and achieve business growth by expanding access to capital and educational resources. Fifth Third Bank, in collaboration with the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, made a commitment to invest $32 billion into the communities that we serve through 2020. The plan was originally announced as a $27.5 billion commitment in February of 2016. It expanded to $30 billion in November of 2016 and expanded once again in October of 2018 to $32 billion to reflect Fifth Third's expansion into the greater Chicago area. We are making great progress on that commitment with significant help and engagement with community and business partners, organizations like Accion. As you can see from the slide, we have almost completed the 5-year plan with $31.2 billion in lending and investments to improve lives in low and moderate income communities throughout our 10-state footprint. We've committed $13.1 billion in mortgage lending, $8.2 billion in small business lending, and $8.7 billion in community development lending and investments. Fifth Third Bank is committed to all of the markets that we serve. Several hundred entrepreneurs have been helped through our support of economic development programs, including technical assistance and micro lending for small businesses through partners like Accion. If you're launching your business or expanding it, our team at Fifth Third and our resources are available to you every step of the way. Please visit our Business Resource Center at 53.com and let us help you meet your financial goals and assist you with smart financial solutions for both your personal and business needs. Thank you, and back to you, Meredith.
Thanks so much, Philip. We really appreciate the partnership and that commitment to community here at Accion. We love working with Fifth Third. So now we will get started with our discussion about business planning for today. Our experts with us today are Ed Timberlake from Fifth Third Bank and Lotika Pai from the Women's Business Development Center. We're so happy to have both of you with us today. So we can dive into our first question for this moderated discussion for today. So given all of the economic changes that we've been seeing so far, of course, it really makes a lot of sense for small business owners to take time to reconsider the mission and goals for their business. So Ed, can you help us think through what are some of those key questions that can guide business owners thinking around how they might need to change some of their goals?
Sure, Meredith. First, thank you for having me, and hello to everyone that's on our call. I think that some of the key questions that need to be considered, one is the service that you're providing or the product that you're offering. Does it still fit the market the same? Has the market changed such that you need to revise or maybe think through how you offer your product or service and just really understand what needs to change? Related to that, are your financial needs still the same? Do you need more funding? Have you lost funding from sources that you've previously had? Are sales down? How are you going to fill those gaps? So I really think that people just have to be able to adapt their business to the market. And I feel that by doing that, a lot of times we find that, the business may have to change their business model altogether. One of the things that I think about when I think about something along those lines is, there was a day and time where people used to go to Blockbuster Video, but along comes Redbox, and now people can go to a gas station and buy videos for 99 cents. And so that had a great impact on Blockbuster Video, much the same way as COVID is having an impact on our businesses now. And so, how do you adapt so that you can compete and, make the necessary changes to still find your place in the market and keep your business afloat and remain sustainable?
Great. I think that makes a lot of sense. I know I've heard from you just now, and of course from lots of other small business support services to try to look at this as an opportunity to adapt, though we of course have kind of been forced into doing some of that. There's some interesting opportunities for that adaptation for both the product and service, for the financial needs, and for the business model as a whole. So thanks for giving us some of those key questions to think about, Ed. Our next question that we'll discuss here is for Lotika. Thanks for being with us, Lotika. Glad to have you here today. I'm wondering if you can help us understand a little bit more here about how small business owners should think about what their customers need now, and if the customer profile is changing or customers' preferred way of doing business is changing.
Yes, of course. Good afternoon, everyone, and hope everyone's staying safe and healthy. Just to kind of dive into this question, at least for me, shutting off the economy, the stage that we are in right now, is not really like switching off the lights in your house, right? So we don't really expect the economy to return to its pre-pandemic productivity levels for some time. So even though we have current stay-at-home orders, and even when they're lifted, we will have a hard road to economic recovery ahead of us. And as small business owners, what's going to happen is that there are changes in your end customer profiles, right? Because this is going to be the new normal, at least for the medium term. So rather, I was thinking about this question, and rather than answer this at a high level, I really want to take a stab at answering it at more of a tactical, actionable level for small business owners that we have on the webinar today. So first of all, I just want you to think about broadly the 4 types of new customer profiles you can expect going forward. And that is purely determined by how people are reacting to COVID-19 and changes in their behaviors brought on by the coronavirus pandemic. So the first group is going to comprise of some of your customers who are still going to want to stay at home even after the stay-at-home order is lifted. So if they're going to limit going outside, how are you as a small business owner going to address their need for your product or service? The second group is really people who are ready to go out, right? They're eager to go out. They want to be assured, however, of their safety. So what you would need to think about is, how do you address their safety needs? And the third group of people are people who are going to continue to work from home for a long time, even after the restrictions are lifted. Their families are going to be at home, and it will be harder for them to transition between work time and playtime, and that's going to impact how they spend their money, and it's going to impact how they shop, what they shop for, and their needs going forward are going to be very different from pre-COVID-19. And the fourth and final group of customer profiles, so to speak, would be people or businesses that are suffering economically. We do expect that the psychological trauma of coronavirus will persist for some time, but added to that, there's going to be this ongoing economic trauma that is going to have a longer hangover. People have lost their jobs. Your customers have lost their jobs. Many businesses that you interact with have sadly closed down. So their spending is going to be down. So you're going to see a lot of businesses and people are going to lower the discretionary spending, and they're going to pinch pennies. So for each of these four different types of customer profiles, you would have to understand how their needs have evolved and what are they looking from you as things have changed. So you need to think about how you can adapt within your business to meet these new needs. Also, I want to remind everyone that these four customer profiles are not necessarily distinct. Someone could be working from home and also be afraid to go out, or they could be working from home. And when they do go out, they want to feel assured that they're safe. And these customer types are expected to persist for months, if not years. So what it's really going to be critical for you as a small business owner is how well you can understand the new needs for these customer groups. In a very simple and effective method to do that is a customer journey mapping method. We don't have time to go into details, but on a high level, the method maps a typical journey the customer takes to fulfill a need that your product or your service satisfies. So each of these four customer profiles will go through a different journey with your product, since they now have different problems that need to be addressed. And they recognize the need, they evaluate alternatives, they complete the transaction with you, and then they finally use your product and service. And it could be as simple as just asking your customer. And as a not-for-profit organization here at the WBDC, we work with small business owners every day, and we're really happy to walk you through this framework. It's a very simple framework on how to conduct customer journey mapping. What you're trying to get to the end of it is you really are thinking about what the customer is thinking, doing, and feeling at each of those four stages in how they interact with your product. And what you are trying to get at as a small business owner to stay sustainable in the longer term is how you can make incremental changes to meet the new needs of your customer where they're at today. So if you can satisfy these new evolving needs for your customers, which have arisen due to coronavirus, you will be not only able to retain them, but you'll be able to attract new customers who might have similar needs, right? And I want you to be mindful that I'm not actually talking about a business pivot here. We've seen in the news that manufacturers pivot from making apparel into making PPP. That's not what I'm talking about here. That's great, and I would encourage you to think about new opportunities, but this is more about serving existing customers, understanding their new customer profiles, and thinking about small incremental changes that will help you adapt to this new reality. And there's a methodical way in which you can actually create this framework for thinking about that.
Thank you so much, Lotika. I think it's really smart to think through the four different areas of folks who are sort of still very nervous to go outside, being very, very cautious and adhering to stay-at-home order, versus folks who are interested in getting out there as long as they can stay safe, folks who might be staying at home specifically for work, and so that limits the ways that they might be exercising some of that spending. And then of course the last group, the folks who have fewer economic resources right now, and kind of mapping those through with the business understanding how those people might interact with the business in this new reality. I think that's a really helpful framework for it. So thank you for walking us through that. The next question we can move to is another important element of the business plan. And I'm sure, Logica, that all of these things are really kind of interrelated as part of that broader plan. So given all of the economic effects that we're seeing of the COVID crisis, any financial projections should probably be adjusted. So how would you advise a business owner to think about adjusting her financial projections right now?
That's a really important question. And, while we think about short-term outlooks for different industries, it varies by industry, right, for small businesses. So it's really important to consider what recovery will look like for you once economy kind of begins to return to its state of normalcy. And you would have to adjust expectations. And my recommendation really is, how do you do it in a measured and financially prudent way? So step one would be, take a step back and assess the financial damage first to your business. The first step in building any plan to rebuild is determining just how deeply your small business has been affected. And there are different layers involved there, right? And you really have to start with hard numbers. So if you haven't updated your financial statement yet, like profit and loss or cash flow statement recently, just, take some time and do that right now, because you need to compare them to last year's number and see exactly where in your business you're losing money and where in your business the downward trends are more significant than the others. And then consider other ways in which your business has been impacted. So have you had to lay off people or all of your employees? You need to factor that into your rebuilding plan. If you've cut marketing and advertising cut costs and your budget for that is down, and as you're ramping up, you need to readjust your budget to maybe spend more in specific categories. So, the first step really is assess the hard numbers, your financial damage. And then the second step would be look at your business plan now. Now that you have a good handle on your numbers, your business model may have worked perfectly fine pre-COVID-19, but coming out of it may mean you have to do some fine-tuning. Specifically, you may kind of need to reconsider how your business is adjusting to this new normal. So for example, if you previously relied on foot traffic to a brick and mortar location for sales, you may need to look at digital expansion to accommodate for a higher number of people who are shopping from home. And when going over your business plan, look at that, like what was working before that might not work as well now, and see where you can adjust or improve to remain competitive. And what I mentioned earlier on the customer journey mapping, it's really going to get you to understand and help you do that, since you undertake that process primarily to identify what incremental changes you need to embrace as a small business and implement to fulfill the needs of these new customer types that are now in front of you thanks to this pandemic. And I think the third step would be to consider whether you actually need funding to recover. So unless you have a large amount of cash on hand going into the pandemic, it's likely that you may need some working capital to jumpstart your business operations coming out of it. So if you are considering financing to help rebuild, keep in mind that borrowing may get more competitive as lenders want some reassurances that loans can be repaid. So what I would say is think about your business and personal credit scores, as well as your business and personal finances, as you can gauge, how likely you are to get approved for funding, and whether your business has the capability to pay back that debt. And finally, you'll have to revamp your budget to account for all the new spending. So coming out of COVID-19, you may have to spend money before you can make money. There's bound to be increase in health and safety regulation, adjustments you might have to make in your business for social distancing carryover. Do you have to hire and train new employees? You might have to purchase new inventory. So you have to think about making your operating budget lean and trimming overhead. And in addition to that, incorporating operational efficiencies around all these increased hygiene requirements, remote working processes, overhead trimming, protecting your cash flow. Do you need to renegotiate payment terms with your vendors? Do you need access to a line of credit with a bank? And you need to address weak links in your supply chain. And there's so much that needs to be planned for as we emerge out of this crisis. And small business owners are such a critical part of our economy and such a critical part of our community. So as you are thinking about recovery, it's important to flip the switch and look at COVID-19 as potentially creating these new needs for your customers. And you need to understand the ways in which you will solve them and then budget and plan for the incremental changes accordingly within your business plan.
Yes, all of that. Yes, it's so smart to think through things in such that logical, building from assessing what's going on now, and then all the important pieces to put together to project what the future might look like for the business. I think that makes a ton of sense. So thank you for walking us through that. The next piece I want to turn to for our fourth question for discussion is around a market analysis, which I think you spoke to both with the journey that the customer might go on and also kind of expecting if there are changes to health and safety regulations. But a key part of a business plan, of course, is kind of analyzing the market. And so I'm wondering if there are key things that folks should be considering as their market analysis is likely to change coming out of the COVID crisis.
That is, again, Meredith, such an important question. But to answer this question, I'm actually going to tailor my response only to adjusting market analysis for existing small business owners. They already have like a target market defined. They have current products and services that they already offer. This answer would be significantly different for startups and new entrepreneurs. So hence my clarification at the outset, because it means the way you conduct market analysis is different for existing businesses and new startups. So in the most simplistic term, the process of gathering information about a market within an industry is what market analysis is all about, right? You're studying the dynamics of the market and you're trying to figure out what makes your customers tick. And the expected outcome is that the analysis that you do better equips you as a small business owner to make these informed decisions about an unpredictable future. And so there's never been a better time than now to actually kind of re-look at your market analysis within your business plan. So the way I like to think about breaking down the process of market analysis for small business owners and to simplify it for them is to really just get them started by answering some key questions. So the first question would be like, who are my potential customers? And you already know who your customers are. And like you mentioned and we discussed earlier, you need to further segment them now into groups based on their changed behaviors and identify their new needs. And the second question you would potentially ask as part of this whole market analysis is, what are my customers' shopping and buying habits? And this is key for the new customer profiles following the, journey mapping process, because you need to figure out where within your current processes is a pain point for them. And then you can then get to how you can make these changes to meet these new needs for your customers. But what I really wanted to spend some time on is to think through digging into what your customers are willing to pay for your products in this new reality. How do you differentiate yourself, and how will you reach existing and new customers in this post-COVID-19 world that we'll find ourselves in eventually? And these are really critical parts of a business plan's market analysis, and they will require adjustments from your end. So if you start with the product, right? Supply-demand relationships have changed. You have to identify the situation in which somebody uses your product. What is the complication created by coronavirus, and how could you resolve for it? So let me give you an example, right? Due to COVID-19, all gyms, fitness studios, everyone has shut down. And how small fitness studios like Pure Barre and Core Power Yoga and Shred 415 and the Pilates company have adapted their product to this new reality is that they are broadcasting live classes. And some of these studios are seeing this significant jump in revenue as well. But the studios did not just move their classes online, right? That's one step. What they did was they took some time to think about what it was about the in-person experience that was so important for their clients, and how could they make that online experience replicate that as closely as possible. So they realized, for instance, music was an integral part of the experience. So They went out and got the proper music licenses and figured out how can they use that in an online live broadcast setting. And they've tried to replicate that sense of community in an online setting. So the takeaway is you need to understand changes that are brought about to your product or service by these new needs of these customers who are either concerned about safety or they are strapped for cash. And that kind of leads us to this very important thing about pricing, right? Which is such a key component of market analysis and thinking about your profitability and comparing yourself to your competitors. And small business owners, I have found that a very common reaction to a drop in discretionary spending and the new economic reality for your customer group is for them to lower prices to accommodate for these changes. And there are two problems with that, right? While people are suffering, there are, a fairly large majority who would happily pay you money if you're satisfying their needs. So you need to challenge yourself to think about how do you fulfill the needs for people who would happily pay you while accommodating for people who are suffering. And also, please don't lower your prices across the board. Once someone buys something at a lower price, they really don't want to pay more for the same thing, even when times are good. So what you do now will impact what you can do for years to come. So make sure you're thinking about versioning. Try value as a call to action as opposed to price as a call to action. Try price differentiation, anything but lowering your prices across the board. And also where there are threats, there are opportunities, and the crisis, it provides extra businesses for companies like Zoom, like all of us on this webinar, but there are also incremental opportunities for small business owners to tap into if they can identify these gaps in the market and customer needs as they're conducting the analysis. So, make sure that you take time to capture that in your market analysis so that you can actually later then tap into those opportunities.
Great. I think that makes a lot of sense, of course, to think through the various different elements and really assess the impact of the different options you have available. So thank you so much for walking us through that. I think that is really helpful to think through those details in such a logical way. So thank you, Lotika. The next question that we're going to think about when it comes to adjusting a business plan has to do with staffing and operations. I know that this is an area that many small business owners are very keyed into closely right now. So Ed, I'm hoping you can help us think about if there's any best practices or any advice you can give to have some staffing changes, operational changes that might set businesses up to withstand or better weather storms like this in the future as they look to rebuild.
Sure. I think the key here, Meredith, is making sure that you have the right people in place. But even before that, let me back up just a little bit. Even before making sure that you have the right people in place, you also want to make sure that, as the leader of that business, you've established the right type of culture. You want to make sure that your employees are positive and that they are not coming into the workplace negative. And I think that a lot of times starts with the owner. When you have an owner that comes in that's always up and optimistic and always, kind of being transparent and sharing with the staff, look, this is our plan. This is how we're going to weather this storm. I think that helps, a whole lot with the culture of the business versus, when you have that owner that just kind of walks through the door, head is down, doesn't really share with employees what's going on, because then, at some point they start to guess. And then when people feel uncomfortable, then that's when they start to look around and look at other opportunities. And then, you can end up losing staff. Also, making sure that you have the right size staff. I think what we're going through right now may show some people that, they have too many people on their staff, or maybe they have too little people on their staff. So I think those are things that you have to think through. And then going back to the point that I started with is making sure that you have the right people in place. I think that, for a small business, your people are your number one asset. And, hiring the wrong person, like say at Fifth Third Bank, if we hire the wrong person, we can get them out of there without it affecting our operations. But when you're a smaller business, let's say you have a staff of 3 to 4 people, and you bring in that one person that is not a good fit, that could be disastrous to to the entire business operation, and could in some cases mean putting you out of business just by having the one wrong person. Additionally, I feel that for businesses that do have the smaller workforce, you also have to make sure that you're cross-training your employees wherever you can. Now, I understand there may be some positions that you may have an accountant, and then your driver may not be able to do what the accountant does, but if there are any opportunities that you can cross-train your people, that will also help you, because not only does that ensure that if one of your people goes out, I don't know, maternity leave, or just goes out sick, that things don't come to a halt. You have someone else on staff that can fill in. Or if you have that person that up and quits on you, it's the same thing. So those would be the recommendations that I have for, staffing and operations, is again, making sure that you have the right people in place, making sure that you have the right size staff, and making sure that you have a good work culture and that you're keeping your people upbeat and motivated.
I think that's great, Ed. Thanks for walking us through those. I think that last point around the cross training can also be really valuable to small business owners who don't want to be a one person show. If you can cross train your staff and delegate to some of them, it takes some of the pressure off of the demands of the business owners' leadership. So I think that that's a really great point, and thanks for walking us through some of those considerations with staffing. So our last question here to round out the moderated portion of the discussion is really around what happens if somebody just needs to start over. Everything feels like it needs a refresh, or we just want to kind of wipe the slate clean. What do you think, Ed, would be a good place to start? And where should people look for either resources or advice or something to help start over?
Well, I love this question, because I always tell people first and foremost that when it comes to your business plan, I honestly don't even like to call a business plan a business plan. I prefer to call it a strategic plan, because for me, your business plan shouldn't be a document that you put together just because you want to go visit your banker and in an attempt to get a loan. And then once you get that loan, then you kind of just throw that business plan back up on the shelf and you go back to business as usual. I think a business plan should be a living, breathing document that you are continuously updating, because you should be able to use your strategic plan as a roadmap. It'll allow you to see where you've been, where you're at, and where you're going. And just like we've talked through today and talked about the effects of COVID and any other threats that may face your business, where you're going and how you're going to get there is probably always going to be a moving target. And so when you use your strategic plan as a living, breathing document and you're continuously updating it, again, it just allows you to get a better hold. And, again, like I said, it allows you to see where you've been, where you're at, and where you're going. So when it comes to resources to help you with that, there are a plethora of resources that are out there. Some of the most important that I think are, you have your small business centers, you have your women's business centers, you have SCORE, which is offered a program through the SBA, which is the Service Corps of Retired Executives, if I got that acronym correct. And then you have nonprofits just like Accion and the Opportunity Fund, and there are probably others in the different areas where our owners from, I'm sure, across the all over, there are other CDFIs in place. And I feel like CDFIs are a good opportunity not only to get technical assistance to help you with a business plan, they're also a good source to access capital. Because right now, one of the things that's happening due to this COVID crisis, a lot of banks have tightened up their underwriting requirements. And, you know, not only that, some banks are in portfolio management mode, meaning that they aren't even really looking at making loans to new clients. They're only focused on their existing clients. And so nonprofit CDFIs are a good opportunity for business owners, especially those business owners that have been around for less than 2 years or 2 to 3 years, to allow them to access capital. Because what happens with a lot of our CDFIs is that they have they're a little bit more flexible with respect to their underwriting criteria, because unlike banks and credit unions, they're not regulated quite the same. So they're able to have a little bit more flexibility. Doesn't mean that they're just going to give just anyone a loan, and it doesn't mean that they don't have underwriting criteria, but they're more relationship lenders where they're willing to sit and listen to the story and get a better understanding of the business. But for those of you who are with banks and do have lending relationships with your bank, the one thing that I will tell you is, if you're with a bank, or if you are at a bank right now and you don't have a relationship with a business banker, then make sure that you go out and do that, because nothing is more valuable than having a relationship with someone that you can pick up the phone and get in contact with. At Fifth Third, one of the things that we pride ourselves on, we always talk about putting our customer at the center, but on the business banking side, we have an approach where us as relationship managers, we manage our clients' full relationship. So, for example, if one of my clients comes to me and they need to open up a new account, they don't have to go into a bank to do that. A lot of times I can get the paperwork that I need from them over the phone. We get the account open and activated, and then they are welcome to go into a bank to fund the account, or they can wire funds into the account. So again, I say all that to say, make sure that you do have a relationship with a business banker who can walk you through some of your options that you're going to have.
All right, thanks so much, Ed. I think all of those are really valuable resources, and I think you really proved the point that there are so many people who are focused on supporting small businesses right now, but always. You know, there's a myriad of different places that folks can turn to get that support, whether it's an existing banking relationship or a nonprofit support system. I think that those are the important things to remember, is that there's somewhere to turn right now. There's lots of help available. So thank you for giving us some of those examples.
My pleasure.
And I mean, thanks to both of you, to Ed and to you, Lotika, for sharing all of your insights. I know I personally feel like I already learned so much, but now I am excited to turn over to some of the questions that we have from the audience. So we welcome anybody who has joined us to type in your questions about business planning or adapting that strategic plan, as Ed likes to call it. Type those questions into the chat box, and I will read them out for our panelists today. So I'll be happy to ask those for you. Before we do that, just very quick, want to remind everybody that we are recording this webinar right now, so you can refer back to this information at a later time, and I'll send a link to that recording following the conclusion of the webinar. So no worries if you didn't take a bunch of notes, you can refer back to it at another time. So the first question that we had come in that I want to direct to you, Lotika, is to talk a little bit about the concept that you were speaking about around assessing how to kind of go to market with that market analysis, and how to articulate the business's value to the new customers with their changing needs. And you mentioned this idea of having a call to action about something different other than particularly a competitive price. Do you have any examples that you could give around what else somebody could call their customers to action around other than the price?
Oh, I was muted. So yeah, that was, I think, 3 questions. I will kind of maybe not answer them in the sequence that you asked, but I'll cover all of it. So one of the things is, pricing, I feel, is something that small business owners should spend a lot more time thinking about, because it impacts your profitability in a much more significant way over the short term and the medium term more than volume does. And it's something that I always love to tell small business owners is, don't be a loss leader. Don't do simplistic pricing. Don't just do, cost plus markup and that's your price to your end customer. So we already talked about how adapting to COVID-19, you shouldn't be just looking at price as a call to action. So what I meant by thinking about value as a call to action was, it's you telling your customer, work with us because we add more value. So hold the base price of your product or service exactly the same, but give them some extras in the short term to actually add value to your product or service offering. So what that enables you to do, so maybe it's a voucher for something, maybe it's a free coffee, maybe it's, it's just that something else that you provide them to delight them in the short term. Now, as you emerge out of this recession, what that's going to do for you is you get to keep your prices at exactly the same level as they were pre-crisis, and then you can pull back the extras. And nobody's going to complain about it. It doesn't stick out as much. And the other thing I mentioned was versioning. And what I love about versioning is you're looking at your product mix, right? So Starbucks did a brilliant thing during the last recession in 2008 when, during the financial crisis. And instead of reducing the prices of their lattes, right? So the lattes are what, $5.75 or whatever, they're ridiculously expensive. What they did was that they introduced something called a Starbucks Via, which was this ready to brew instant coffee, and they just offered it at $1. So what that enabled them to do was when recovery kicked in, they were able to serve the expensive lattes of which they never reduced the price for. And at the same time, they continued with Via as part of their product mix. So think about how within your products as well, can you add some differentiation so that you can have differentiated pricing. Think about tiered pricing approaches, like how do you think about volume discounts? And it doesn't have to be simplistic. It can be a lot more intricate than just, you buy two and I give you, one free. It can be a lot more involved than that. And then also, thinking about price differentiation, versioning, value as a call to action, like think about all these different things before you actually lower your prices. Because it's like gravity, right? Like once it goes down, it's very hard to bring your prices back up. So think about pricing very carefully as you're looking for your recovery. Now, in terms of your, the second and the third question was more around market analysis and how do you do that? And, the customer journey, like all of it involves so much interviewing, right, that you have to do. So there are a lot of different ways in which I can frame that for you, but I'm going to take a fairly simple approach and kind of want to highlight two things. One is when you are talking to people, try not to talk like to just one customer or two customers, because that's not a significant data point. So that's statistically not relevant. Within your 4 customer groups, at least talk to 4 or 5 people, ask them a bunch of questions, and we'd be happy to provide you with a framework on how you can ask these questions to your customers. But it's really digging into the why. And I have found is that surveys, like when you send people surveys, yes, it's effective, but it doesn't really give you an opportunity to dig further and kind of dig into the details and pivot your questions as you're asking them to get to their true pain points. And right now, your customers want to see small businesses succeed. So reach out to your customers, ask them for 10 or 15 minutes of their time, talk to them on the phone, do a Zoom call with them. And it really shouldn't take you that long once you have this framework of questions that you want to ask them. So that I feel is like primary research, right? This is your pursuit of firsthand knowledge on your market directly with your customer. And it's really useful for you because it's exploratory in nature and you're also asking them specific questions. And then you also can do some basic secondary research, which is like publicly available trend data, market statistic. You can look at what the rest of your competitors are doing across the board within your industry, but that for me is secondary research. You really have to start with the primary research first, and doing it via, in this new reality with just phone calls and Zoom calls, and at least try to get 5 customers within each customer group to talk to, and you will find that there are certain problems that persist across the customer groups that you can focus on first, and then you will find out individual trends about your market and customer needs within each individual group as well that you can address.
Yeah, I think that all of that makes, I feel like I've said this to you, Lotika, and to you, Ed, this whole time, but all of that makes so much sense. Just finding that primary research avenue, especially now, it might be a little challenging, a little different, but getting the information directly from the customer, I think adds additional value over and above kind of secondary market research you might be able to do. So related to that, I know you mentioned this, Lotika, that the Women's Business Development Center has some resources or maybe some templates, things like that, to help people think through both the market analysis part, maybe the customer journey, or an overall business plan template. So, and I think that those resources are available, of course, through your organization, through lots of different organizations. But where can people go to find those templates? To the website?
So usually what we do is, because each small business is fairly unique, we do a lot of one-on-one counseling sessions. So we provide a lot of strategic business counseling one-on-one. We have a really, really talented group of technical assistance providers, and all you do is you call in to our main number and book an appointment with one of the counselors. So it just kind of gives them a sense of, how can they help you, and what are the right resources that we can put in front of you. And with regards to customer journey mapping, we do workshops, we do webinars, we do a lot of cohort-based programming within the WBDC. So we help entrepreneurs at the start of their journey, all the way to businesses that have been in business for 5+ years, to businesses that are much larger and they are getting certified as women-owned businesses. So it's across the spectrum, and we have programming geared for all of them. I think the first step would be just call us at 312-853. Let me see if I remember the number. 3477. The number again, it's 312-853-3477. Book an appointment, and people would be very happy to provide you with resources and guidance on how you can think through all these different ways in which you should be adjusting your business plan, thinking about your customers, mapping their journey. So we'd be very happy to help small businesses, and that's what we do day in and day out. And there is no cost associated with it because, like you mentioned, we are a not-for-profit, and we are here to help.
Great, thank you. I'm sure that lots of folks are going to be using those resources lickety-split. So I know that Fifth Third also has resources available. Philip spoke at the beginning. Ed, do you typically see lots of referrals to the 53.com/business? Is that where Fifth Third's resources around business planning or some other tools typically live for your customers?
Yes, they can visit our website, or they can get in touch with the banker directly if they have more specific questions or specific needs. We do also pride ourselves in working with a lot of our community sponsors, community partners who maybe provide some services that we may not offer. But we're happy to always connect you with our community partners, in those instances, to get you the help that you need if it's a service that we don't offer ourselves.
Great. I think that's kind of the name of the game, is the partnership aspect, for sure. So I know that we at Accion do that a lot. Really appreciate partnership and creating those opportunities and resources for small business owners, whether it's something we do in-house or if it's something a partner does. So definitely appreciate that approach. The last couple questions that I think we'll have time for today. The first one, we had a lot of folks asking for some clarification around one of the last things Ed said about organizations like Accion or Opportunity Fund or other CDFIs. And just to clarify quickly, a CDFI is a community development financial institution, which is a lending organization that is not regulated in quite the same way as a bank. So as Ed was saying, there's some more flexibility around underwriting rules and requirements for the credit box and age of business and some things like that. It's just a little bit of a different approach that we see as complementary to services that a bank offers. And so a business might be in a good position to be a bank customer, or a different business with a little bit of a different economic situation might be a good fit for a CDFI. And Accion is one. So you could go to us.accion.org, which is our website, to learn about what a CDFI is and kind of how we work. But there's also a lot of, as Ed said, there's a lot of CDFIs. There's hundreds of local community development financial institutions who can help. So you can Google around and find a local group if you are interested. So I just wanted to take a second to say that. And then the other thing I wanted to take a minute to address, because a lot of people are asking these questions in the chat box around the Paycheck Protection Program. And of course, the focus of today's discussion has been around business planning and adaptability for that plan. So we're not going to address directly those questions about the Paycheck Protection Program, but Fifth Third Bank definitely has a wealth of resources and information on their website for bank customers who have received or are in the process of applying for PPP. So I encourage to direct you there for those questions about PPP. And then if you're interested in kind of more broad information about the Paycheck Protection Program overall, you can go to the SBA's website or to the Department of the Treasury's website, is where a lot of the most up-to-date information is being published about those two, on those two agencies' websites. So definitely wanted to address the fact that lots of people are asking those questions. So didn't want to make anybody feel like they've been ignored on those two fronts. So I'm gonna just ask if there's any additional questions that we can address today with our two experts, Lodika and Ed. I really appreciate you both taking the time to help us think through these elements of the business plan. So do feel free to type in any questions if you still have anything outstanding. And we will move to just one or two questions. We've got 4 more minutes, so feel free to jump in with those. I have one question here that we haven't gotten to yet that I'm interested in seeing. Lodika, if you can help us understand a little bit more with regard to the customer profiles that you were speaking to. So kind of going way back to the beginning of our conversation. Do you think when we're thinking about that customer profile and the customer analysis, kind of almost hybridizing that with the market analysis, is there a way that we can ask people specifically how they're feeling to get a good sense of kind of what the divide is in terms of if we have most of our customers falling into the first camp versus the third? Is there, how would you go about thinking through the proportion? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yes.
So I think it may be very helpful if I break that down a little bit, because a typical journey really just has of a customer, and a lot of these customers are going to bleed into each other. The goal really is, as you're doing the mapping, and that is part of your market analysis as well, because it all rolls up into your business plan, there are 4 discrete steps when you're doing it. The first step really is you're identifying a need, right? So, so the first step in a customer journey, need recognition, and maybe my need right now is I need a furnace, or I'm hungry, or, that's just me recognizing that I have a need. The second step in a customer journey is you're evaluating alternatives, right? So my second step could be, do I eat at Uno's Pizzeria, or do I order Giordano's, or do I get a salad? I look at my pantry and my fridge and I find that there's nothing in there that interests me, so I'm looking at alternatives. And then I pick one of the alternatives, right? So the third step now is you're completing the transaction. So how is the small business owner interacting with me as a customer once I've made up my mind to interact with them, and how are they completing that transaction? Like, where do I hand over my credit card? What pen do they use when I sign? You know, in this new COVID-19 reality, the places that I've been to, they give you gloves, so they're swapping out the pens. So think through how customers are going to complete their purchase. And then finally, look at how are they using your product and service. Now, when you get these questions answered, and you have to ask a lot of whys when you are doing this analysis, you have to take a step back and look at all of this through a COVID-19 lens, and then try to evaluate where in your current processes are you creating problems for customers and their needs as they exist today, as they're going to exist in the medium term, and in the longer term, because we are going to have some social distancing carryover. We are going to have increased hygiene requirements. Some of it is going to be required by the government for compliance, but some of it your customers are going to force on you. So look at all of these answers through the COVID-19 lens. And again, remember, these are just incremental changes that you are trying to plug into place as you're evaluating the needs of your customer. What is your customer thinking, doing, and feeling at each of these stages is going to then inform you what you need to do as part of your business process to accommodate for these changes. And the way you interview questions is, you know, you ask your questions, you ask them open-ended questions like who, what, when, where, why, how. So for instance, what do you do when your furnace stops working? Or, you know, something as simplistic as what do you do when you have an anniversary coming up? And, you know, do you buy flowers? Do you get chocolates? Do you take them out for a fancy meal? So just ask open-ended questions to your customer that drive down into the need for your product or service, and then ask them, you know, when do they have this problem? And that will help you tailor your marketing message. And where are they looking for that information? And that will help you tailor where you need to put your messaging. Are they searching on Google? You know, how are they looking for your product in this new reality? And then how do you help them choose among alternatives? So there are a lot of like very open-ended questions that will help you kind of pinpoint the pain points that your new customer profiles are facing. And then that'll inform you on how you can address that in a prudent manner, in a financially responsible manner, and also in a manner that you're empathetic to your customers' needs, and you're demonstrating to them, yes, we've heard you and we're addressing it, and please continue to work with us and shop with us.
That's great. I think that sort of deliberate thought process and asking those open-ended questions makes a ton of sense. So thanks for walking us through that. And I also, again, I just want to thank both of you, Ed Timberlake from Fifth Third Bank and Lota Kapai from the Women's Business Development Center. Thank you both so much for your time and for sharing your expertise with our group today. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure everybody who joined us appreciates it as well. And many thanks to all of the small business owners who took a time out of their day today to join us and think through these issues. We're at the top of the hour, so we're going to sign off for today, but do be on the lookout for additional information, both with the recording of this webinar and about upcoming webinars in our series. Again, thanks so much, Ed and Lotica, for your expertise today. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. All right, everyone. We will see you soon on our next webinar, and have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.